Scales. Some musicians love them, some hate them, and some fear them. But I think there is no musician who would not, in their heart, acknowledge that scales are fundamental to the health and well-being of all of us musicians. It ensures our confidence, our agility, and so much of what we aspire to do in all the repertoire that we play. So I'm going to give you a series of scales lectures, and in this one I'm going to just plant the seeds once again about how the importance of thought and the cognitive side before you even start playing is so integral to actually fulfilling your scales. So before we even get to that point, we have to get over the idea that we are bad at scales or that scales are difficult. We have to encourage ourselves, we have to give incentive, and therefore the mindset in which we go into learning, whether it's scales or whether it's anything else, we have to almost like make a deal. We have to know what is our motive for scales. Now, I have my motives for scales. I have an agenda for my scales in terms of why I do them. For me, it is about sound, it is about mouth, embouchure, stamina, fingers, whether it's on the clarinet or whether it's on the saxophone. I know that by doing my scales, I can rely on my fingers behaving in the way that I want to, that actually my brain and my fingers and the psychological side is, and that is the confidence, they're all linked in together. So attitude in how you go into approaching your scales, there has to be an incentive, a motive that really makes you perhaps overcome some of the feelings of resistance that you might have, and indeed fear. It is all about, first of all, accessing information, and this is where the cognitive side comes in. It's incredibly important, and this might be a contentious thing to say, that scales are not about memory, they are about retrieval. It's about retrieving information that is already there. So we have to access the information so that we can retrieve the information. That retrieval of information becomes the instruction. So we're organizing the information, we're retrieving the information in a very clear and prioritized way, so that we can then commit to the information that becomes the instruction for what we can then commit to in playing of our scale. So it is a very careful and systematic process where it is not memory, but the way you've organized that information that actually ensures the fluency of the scales. A lot of thinking has to go into the scale even before you start playing, and I think that's where sometimes the mistakes are made. So having a plan of what you need to think, breaking the task down of before you play the scale, of actually what information you need to retrieve in order that you can turn it into a prioritized instruction to which you can then commit. And in further videos, I'm going to break this down even further, but it is having a process, a systematic process, which will then allow you to first organize that information. What is the core information that you need to retrieve, so that that will inform and instruct what you play? And it might be that you retrieve, let's say for instance, focusing on the major scales. First of all, you would consider, has it got sharps or flats? And then there are all sorts of systems which I will further broaden into. But you've got to think about the key signature. You haven't played a note yet. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to say which that sharp or flats it is. And then what I would certainly, and that you want to really give yourself some acknowledgement for what you've done. You know, these are the little steps, the layers of learning, which I've referred to a lot. And that needs some acknowledgement, you know, some validation that I've remembered the key signature. Yay! That is worthy of a real, yes, I've done that. And then the next thing is, okay, now I have to remember what I am doing while I am doing it. This is very much about multitasking. So it might be that before you play a note, you might finger it and say the names of the notes, because that fundamentally is going to be part of the instruction, particularly in the early days of playing scales. And then, of course, other thoughts will come, a lot of multitasking, of course, to do with sound, to do with support, do with fingers, but that's going to come later. It's not also, notice, I didn't play the scale fast. Scales do not have to be played at breakneck speed. In fact, actually, I encourage slightly slower playing of scales, because I think that allows us to really get bonding, if you like, with what we're doing. I always start my warm-up with scales. It's warming up the clarinet. I'm getting a feel of what the mouth feels like. I'm getting a feel of the reed. I'm getting a feel of how my fingers are. I'm checking in with, am I distracted? Where is my focus? So there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot of distracting thoughts. So if you're still in the learning process, you want to think names of notes, particularly if you're a new learner, but even if you've just pushed scales to one side, finger and say the names of the notes. And then when you go back to playing it the second time, so you first of all fingered it, literally F, G, A, B flat, C, and so on, you will then have that instruction in your head. Now, you're not going to memorize it by just simply doing it with fingers, which is one of the real pitfalls. So really watch out for that. You do not want to learn scales by fingers, because that again doesn't make scales transferable into other areas. It's really important, and that's another benefit of scales, is that it's actually connecting the cognitive, the brain, to the fingers. Then you will actually play the scale, but you play it at a speed where you can almost be like a second voice telling yourself what you're going to do. And that is the cohesion between the instruction, the cognitive, and the practical. And then you have the psychological, because you know what you're doing, and that will then build a confidence. And slowly, little bit by little bit, you will start to feel that rather than scales being like Mount Everest, that they can be broken down. The other thing I will leave you with is, while the intention is strong, you say, right, okay, I'm going to do 6 scales a day. And I haven't mentioned mine, as I'm going to mention that in another video. But what I would say is, start small, build up. It's all about assimilating information. And in that way, slowly your scales will become more integral. The fear of them, the resistance to do them will start to diminish, and you'll start becoming really committed to the ethos of scales, because scales are fundamental, and they really are a resource not only of facility but of confidence in what we play and making absolute bonding with our instrument.